Welcome back to the Mysteria podcast. I'm Marcus Da Silva, and I am very pleased to be joined today by Miss Catherine Fogarty. How you doing today?
I'm good. Thank you. Thank you for having me on.
Pleasure to have you on. So, I guess kind of how this started was you recently published a book, and I think that was kind of the crux of this podcast was for that book. And I have read the book. It's fantastic. We're going to get into it more on the back half of this podcast, but actually I'll show it for the audience. It's called Murder on the Inside, the true story of the deadly riot at Kingston Penitentiary. And then that's the book there. Great book. So yeah, we'll definitely dive into the content of that near the end. But before that, we'll just kind of have a discussion, and the line of work that you're involved in is super interesting and lots of good stories there. So we'll kind of dive in, and
All
I
right.
guess we'll just start from the beginning. So where did you grow up? Where are you from?
I'm actually from Toronto, born and raised in the west end of Toronto, and now I live in sort of the downtown core. But yeah, from Toronto. Went to school. Started in Toronto, and then actually ended up in the University of Sydney, Australia, actually. So, and University of Guelph. And then before I wrote the book, or part of writing the book, I was doing an MFA, a Master's in Fine Arts at King's University in Halifax. So I'm one of those perpetual students, I think.
And how did you end up in Sydney? Was that for a undergrad degree?
No, it was actually for a graduate degree. My first career was in social work. So my undergraduate degree was in social work with a specialization in criminology, which is part of why I think I kind of was attracted to the story about the prison riot. It's funny how everything kind of comes full circle in your life. So yeah, my first career was in social work, and I was working for the city for a number of years. I worked with a number of different at-risk populations, and at the time I was a social worker. That was actually during the AIDS epidemic as well. So I did a lot of work with the AIDS community in Toronto. Anyway, so I was working for the city, and it was actually it was something, many years ago. It was called the Bob Rae Days, and Bob Rae was our premier, and they needed to save some money. So what they did is they offered, any government employees, you could take a year off to study, and your job would be held for you. And I mean, of course, that's a very rare opportunity. And I was doing my Bachelor of Social Work part-time up at York. And I just kind of went, you know what, this is the best opportunity to go. And I'd never done that, that kind of traveling after you graduate from university. I'd just gone straight to work. So I thought, you know what, I'm going to combine these two, and applied to the University of Sydney to do a master's in social work. And off I went for the great adventure.
And I guess so you would have been about 21, 22?
No, I was actually probably about 29. I was thinking I was about 29 at the time, because as I said, I'd been
Oh,
already
right.
working
Yeah,
for
work
several
for a bit.
years. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then going back to school part-time. And that's when they said, you can take this year off. And I said, okay, I'm off.
And then
Uh,
after that, so after Sydney, where did you go?
Yeah, so what happened after Sydney is I came back and went back to my job. So this was with social services in Toronto, like the welfare department. And as I said, I'd worked there for quite some time at that point, and it was a government job. And I just realized when I came back, I think I went back for about 5 months, and I thought, I cannot do this. And one of the things that happens, I think, with many types of careers, and happened to me in social work, is as you get into a career and you start out, working with frontline, working directly with people. I mean, I worked at a shelter for abused women. As I said, I worked with various AIDS communities and groups in Toronto, worked with, young teenagers dealing with pregnancy, street youth, etc. And then as you kind of get, more mature and more successful, you actually start getting further away from what you intended to do. So at that point, when I came back from Sydney, I mean, I was a manager in a social services department. So I didn't even see clients anymore. So I just thought, this isn't what I intended to do. So I left social services and left social work. And my very good friend of mine was a casting director, very well-known casting director throughout Canada, and television producer. And she said, you know what, why don't you come and work with me? And I said, well, I can't do that. I'm a social worker. I don't know anything about TV. But it was just the timing, and I just said, okay, you know what, I'm gonna jump. I'm gonna take the leap, and so that's what I did. And then for the next 20 odd years worked in television. So and still am to today.
I want to back you up a bit because I was kind of curious about that. So going into social work, I guess then you would have been about 22 going in to about
Yep.
29 when you left. Uh, was that difficult to, like, as a young woman, would that have been difficult to learn how to compartmentalize work? And because the work that you're in, I mean, tremendous life experience,
Yeah.
but certainly tugging on the heartstrings at times, I guess is the expression.
Yeah. It's very hard, and I think a lot of people burn out after a little while. It is very difficult work, but it's also extremely rewarding, because you're, as I said, if you're working directly with people, and hopefully making a little bit of a difference. I mean, I know when I worked at the shelter for abused women, that was very, very difficult, because they would come in, and they would often come in with children, and you could see how the cycle of abuse was continuing. You'd see like a little 5-year-old boy attacking his mother, and so things like that were very difficult. Also, when you work in frontline social work, a lot of times you're working shift work. Like, for example, in that position, I worked shift work, and actually, when I went to Sydney, Australia, I continued working, and I was working at a hospice for people with AIDS, and would work a 24-hour cycle where I basically kind of lived there and slept there. And that was for people who were, basically, probably a few months away from passing on. So again, you can't change that outcome, but you can be there and be as supportive and as you can be. So it was extremely rewarding work.
I've done 3 podcasts with, most recently with Alan Samuelson, who's a HIV patient. He's in his 80s now. Dr. Julio Montaner from Vancouver here, and Dr. David Cool as well. So we I feel like I got quite an education on that. But one of the things that really struck me about particularly with the AIDS pandemic, was that it was just so unprecedented, because it was young people and older people. Like, it didn't really discriminate. Like, it was a really unique group of people, and not really something that the medical system had really seen before. And then certainly worldwide, it was, much greater implications on that. So
Yeah.
must have been just again, it's terrible, but must have just been fascinating work.
Yeah, I mean, it basically decimated an entire community in Toronto. I worked with one organization, and I know, several years down the line, I think there was one person left that I had originally started working with. So an entire generation of people were decimated, and I always remember one day being at the office in social services, and we were on Charles Street, Charles and Bloor, and not too far from Charles and Bloor is the original hospice for people with AIDS called Casey House, which was very, very well known at the time. And my colleagues this one day at lunch hour said, "We got to run over to Casey House." And I said, "Oh, why?" And Princess Diana's going to be there. And so all of us ran over and, watched Princess Diana as she came over to Casey House to pay her respects, because she was one of the first people, and certainly one of the most well-known women in the world, who actually reached out and touched a person with AIDS and went to hospices and hospitals and talked to these people and met with these people, because many people were terrified that it was a contagious disease, and they couldn't they couldn't shake a person's hand or something like that. So there was so much stigma attached to the disease, and she definitely is somebody that really helped to change that perspective.
Wow. I know it's good. It's so interesting, and in the book too, one of the things that fascinates me is that you can learn a lot about society now by digging into the past a bit. And you can see how things have changed and how things have stayed the same, and hopefully things are going in the right direction. But it's fascinating to get a little window into the past. It's fascinating stuff.
Yeah, it certainly is. It certainly is. Yeah. So.
And so moving forward then, so you come back, you're in Canada, you start working with your friend who's the casting director. And
Yeah.
what's your first kind of intro level job into, I guess it'd be media?
Yeah. So my first job was basically in casting. We were casting. So of course, Toronto is a mecca for film production. So we were casting for various television series and films that were either Canadian or American. I remember casting a film with I may not pronounce this correctly, Benicio del Toro, the director, and he was doing a
Wow.
film. Yeah, and he was doing a film. Gosh, I'm trying to think of the name of it. It was actually a film about giant cockroaches. That I remember.
Okay.
So I can't remember the name of it. And Marina Sorvino was starring in the film, and so as I said, yeah. So that's how we started out. We also did we worked with various directors and producers in Canada. So we were doing like a series like Road to Avonlea, casting all the people in that. And so yeah, a lot of different experiences and learning. We'd get at that point, because it was, we weren't really reliant on computers at that time. So if we put out a casting call, you'd send out what was called a breakdown, and you'd send out information, usually I guess by fax machine at that point, and all these different roles. So we need a female 20 to 25 and all the different requirements, and then we would literally get thousands of 8x10
Right.
sheets in of all these people. And I remember sitting we had a basement office, and I remember being on the floor and would literally like just sort all these. Okay, there's the females, and there's the males, and there's the kids, and sorting all these stacks and stacks of 8x10 photographs, and then going through them, and then we would hold auditions. And so that was my trial by fire with respect to the business. So
Might seem a bit dry, but I'm very curious, which is like what actually goes into casting? Like, because I just have no concept of what you would be looking for in that. Yeah, I don't have any experience in that
and
area,
I'm not
but
going to tell you. No, just joking.
yeah,
You know what? It's a very interesting role to have, and um, the best thing I can say, because we've since then I've hired a lot of people, a lot of hosts and things for our various shows that we've produced. I always say you just it when you see it.
right.
So So part of the process, of course, is narrowing that down. So you're going to have auditions, and then it just gets, kind of smaller and smaller and smaller. And then, I mean, this has happened to me several times where somebody walks in and they've just got it. Whatever that is,
Right.
they've got it. And you may have seen, 200 people by that time. I mean, it can be a long process. And when I first began, I mean, I was working for other companies, other production companies, other directors. So you'd have a whole group of people in that audition. So you've got a lot of opinions. And then as we started producing our own series, well then, there was only generally two opinions in the room. Yeah, so I could give you a few examples of that where it just clicked. So
It's kind of like
yeah.
watching Kramer on Seinfeld. It's like, he's perfect, you just know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And when I watch shows now, the different series on Netflix and et cetera, et cetera. I mean, between the casting and the writing, those are the two most critical aspects of any series. I mean, the Friends, reunion that just happened. I haven't actually watched it, and I was never a big Friends person. But think about the casting of that. I mean, again, they hit gold. None of those people knew each other before they were cast. They were all fairly inexperienced, and they just, as I said, they hit gold with who they cast and how they were able to, how they interacted and their dynamics. So.
And what would, just so I refer to it correctly, would your job title have been like a casting director? Like
Casting
what's
director.
casting director?
Casting
So
director, yeah.
as a casting director, do you work with like closely with directors and producers, or are you kind of separate from that process? Or does it change?
No, you're working very closely with them in casting the show or movie or series, whatever it happens to be. So once the casting is up and running, then your job, like once they start production, your job is pretty much done at that point, because you've placed the people in the roles. But again, you'd still be working, because sometimes somebody wouldn't work out. Casting choice would change, et cetera, et cetera. So you're still involved, but primarily most of your work is done before they start rolling cameras.
And what were, should be, if you can't answer it, then don't answer it. That's okay. But what were some of the kind of ones that maybe stood out to you where it was like, oh, that was just a great pick and it worked out well for the show or for the movie?
Well, that's an interesting segue into, to my next career, which was basically television production, and opening up my own production company and starting to work on my own series. What happened for us, as I said, my business partner and I, we're still business partners, 20 years later. So as I said, her background was in casting, and then we actually got a call one day, and it was from another production company, and they were it was just the very beginning of all these lifestyle type programs. So, when I was younger, when I was a kid, we had, 5 channels probably in Canada, right? Everybody watched CBC and Hockey Night in Canada kind of thing. And then, as I said, so when is this? I guess, early 90s. The networks started building, like Lifestyle and Women's Network and the Pet Network and the Gardening Network. All these new networks started up, and they needed programming, which is was called lifestyle programming. And so somebody approached us. It was another company, and they said, we're producing a show about a women's repair show. Funny enough, and they knew that my business partner had probably had more tools than any man that they had ever met. She was just that kind of person who is very, very creative and very good with tools and builds things. So and that's why they approached her. I mean, she wasn't really producing, but they knew they were doing this show about women's repair, women doing repairs around their homes and things like that. And they kind of heard that this was something she did on her own. So they approached us and said, would you be willing to produce this? And we're like, okay. So that series ended up being, it was called A Repair to Remember with Meg Ruffman. And Meg Ruffman was an actor, Canadian actor, who was very well known for Road to Avonlea. And this is what she did in her spare time. She loved working with tools and woodworking and things like that, and could fix anything. So they built a show around her, and that was the very first series that we produced. And then from that, things kind of exploded in this lifestyle world. So we just started doing full-time production, and basically left the casting work, let that go, and became full-time television producers.
As far as so I guess this is around the 90s.
Yeah.
Okay. And were you working pretty much entirely out of, I guess, like Ontario, would be Toronto specifically?
Yeah. So that point we were doing, the women's repair show. We did a flower. We actually, that was actually a great series. We did a flower series. It was called Flower Power. And it was for the network HGTV at the time. And at that time, HGTV actually still had G in it, which means gardening. So they were doing gardening shows. So we were asked to do this series. And that's where I actually started writing. Because every episode of this series was basically like the documentary of a single flower. And we traveled all over the world, because we would go where that flower was originally native to, or where the world's leading producer of that particular flower was. So we were, in England, obviously doing English roses, and Hawaii and Belgium, and I mean, you name it. We went to where these flowers are, and they needed a writer, and I said, okay, well, let me give it a try. So there I was, running to different libraries. And I remember going up to one of the big parks in Toronto, up on Lawrence Avenue, has a big gardening center there. And they actually have a gardening library. And I would go up there and I'd pull out all the books about peonies or roses or, whatever it happened to be, and started writing these scripts. And then we'd be traveling, and my business partner always talks about remembering that I'd be like in a hotel room, and writing in the middle of the night for the next day's shoot. So that's actually how I started writing.
I think I can speak for everybody listening. What a cool job that would have been. Holy, so cool.
It was, but I have to say, the one thing about TV and producing that people don't realize, and I always make this as a reference. So we went to Hawaii. We were doing Bird of Paradise and Plumeria, which is what they make the leis out of, and there was a couple others, I think. So we were there for probably 10 days, and I always joke I never saw the beach. Because when you're working on set, on location, it's obviously a very expensive endeavor for the production company. So you're working pretty much 24/7 for that location. So you're on set by, you leave your hotel room and it's dark, because you're on set by, say, 7 a.m. and then you're just going full all day. And then going back to the hotel at the at the end of the shoot of probably a 14-hour day minimum, and grabbing some food with the rest of the crew. And then, as I said, I'd be back in the hotel room writing for the next day. So it's not as I mean, it was absolutely wonderful experience, and I learned a lot about flowers at the time. But we went to Costa Rica, that was another place. But it's definitely not as glamorous as people think it may be. So
I've heard that a lot from musicians too, where it's pretty much the same story. It's like, oh wow, you get to do a world tour. And it's like, yeah, well, hang on. So we see the hotel, we see the venue, and we see the green room, and then we're on the plane or the bus and
yeah,
next city, next city. Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
It's a
yeah.
grind, definitely.
Yeah,
It's
because your
not.
time is very limited, and your time is very expensive because you've got however many people, your crew with you and stuff. So yeah, absolutely. But still, I mean, a great experience.
Okay, so you're doing that show, and that show ran the flower show, which a really good concept, by the way. It's a really interesting concept for a
Yeah,
TV show. And how long did you do that for?
that was probably 3 years. I think they did end
Oh,
up doing, gosh, yeah, probably 70. In that back then too, and if you got an order for a series, it would be 26 episodes.
oh,
And
wow.
that was just
Okay.
that was yeah, exactly. And that was just standard. Nobody even thought of less. It
Yeah.
was like, every season was 26 episodes. I think we did over 70 episodes of that series. And then we moved on to some cooking shows, because the Cooking Network, had just started up. So we did quite a few cooking series. So, learned all about that and building kitchens on set and things like that. So that was fun. I'm not a cook, but I certainly learned a lot from the various chefs that we worked with. So
More of a general question. I'm curious what were some of the changes that you've noticed? Because you're still involved in production.
yeah.
And so what are some of the changes that you've observed from when you started to now? And I'll just kind of make it a very general question, just anything involved in media.
Well, I mean, probably the biggest change that's happened over the years was with respect to the video on demand, that changed the whole network model of what somebody like I do. We used to basically, what we would do is we'd pitch ideas to networks, and they would say yay or nay. And at that time, as I said, all these networks had exploded. So there were so many of them, and they all needed programming. So you'd go to the HGTV, and we did a lot of work with the women's network, and there was the comedy network, and there was a history network. There was a network for everything.
Mhm.
And then over the last several years, that's all changed, and all those networks, because particularly in Canada, all the networks started amalgamating. So, we went from however many, and we're almost back down to five networks, and not five channels, but probably four or five networks that own everything. So all of those smaller channels and smaller networks are now owned by either Rogers or Bell. So they've all amalgamated. So as a producer, um, for example, the Women's Television Network and HGTV, if we had an idea, we could go to both of them. Now, both of those networks are owned by the same company. So our options became much less. And then, of course, then the video on demands started, which was the Netflixes and the Amazons. And so that's really made a tremendous shift to what we do and how we work.
So it seems like how you phrase it, the monopolization of content has significant effect on kind of the people like you who are more on the
Yeah,
front lines of creating content.
yeah, very significant. So what ended up happening for us, we don't produce in Canada anymore. Everything
Oh,
that we produce and anything we develop, we go straight to the US with, because the Canadian market just unfortunately just got too small again, and their budgets started to shrink dramatically as well. So because in Canada, the difference between Canada and the US, I mean, it's kind of a complex scenario, but in Canada, we have ownership because of Canadian content legislation and Canadian content rules. So every network in Canada is mandated to produce and air a certain amount of Canadian content, which means it's produced by Canadians. And that actually started shifting. And so if they were, say, at a 70% CanCon rule, in their programming, then it went down to 60 and 50, and that's really started shrinking, and which meant a lot of Canadian television independent companies went out of business. So we were very fortunate that we had a very successful show, but it is produced through the US and not Canada. So.
And with the fact that the exchange rate from Canadian to American, I mean, now it's really bad again. Seems like it's always bad. I mean, geez. But would that not be a factor to keep people, like keep Canadians out and keep Americans in, due to just the price of operating in the States, or not so much?
Yeah, I mean, particularly for people in film, I mean, as we talked about earlier when we were casting, and still to this day, I mean, there's a lot of American production in Toronto and in Vancouver, of course, and that all relates back to tax credits. So an American film can come up to Canada and shoot whatever they happen to be producing, and then they're getting a 30% tax incentive on that. So it's very affordable for them, and that's why there are so many here. And as Canadian producers, we of course also get tax credits and incentives as well. So but in the US, when you produce in the US, if I went to a network, whether, again, I could go to an NBC or I could go to a Netflix, I mean, there's slightly different models, but in the US, you as a producer, you do not own that production. You don't own the IP, so you are just pretty much a producer for hire. So that's again a very different financial model. Whereas what we have produced for Canada, we actually own and will always own. As I said, that relates back to the Canadian content rules and legislation.
Has that changed over time? The idea of ownership over content as far as intellectual property is concerned?
Well, it has changed with respect to that number, that percentage of CanCon, as it's called, CanCon. It's diminished quite significantly. So as I said, it was kind of it was always a love-hate relationship, because if a network had, say, I mean, again, I'm just putting, throwing a number out, if they had a 70% CanCon regulation in their programming, in their prime time programming, they had to work with Canadian producers. So they couldn't go, it's much cheaper for a network to go and acquire a format like America's Got Talent, all those different format shows. And so they did bring them up to Canada. They did license Canadian formats, but so more and more of that started happening, because that's cheaper to do than actually producing through Canadian content. So it just kind of slowly got whittled away. I personally wouldn't even know what those Canadian content rules are anymore, because as I said, we only produce for the US now. So
I've been thinking about that, because I'm glad you pointed it out, because I guess there's a bit of an error on my part, which was there's been an explosion of filming in Vancouver in the last, I guess probably about the last 10 years. And I mean, like most notably, like they filmed the second Deadpool here, but they filmed the first Deadpool here, and they actually shut down the Georgia Viaduct, which is like a main traffic hub, what do you call it? Road into downtown Vancouver, downtown core. And they shut that down for like a month and a half. It was chaos and all that stuff. It was quite funny, but they filmed like Supergirl and all those, like, I guess the network is CW, the American I think they're on Netflix and stuff too. But
Okay.
all those like Arrow and all
Yeah.
those superhero ones, they all film them up here. And
Yeah.
so I thought, oh, that's great. Like they must have more Canadians involved, but it actually doesn't seem too much like that from the IP side. Seems
Yeah.
more like the American companies just kind of come up, they do their thing here, and then they go back.
Yeah, it's called a service production. So they will hire Canadians and they will get, it's all sort of like a point-based system and stuff like that. So they will hire Canadians. Canadians generally won't be in the lead, may not
Yeah.
be the director, may not be the, but obviously most of the crew will
Mhm.
be Canadian. It certainly still benefits everyone. But it's indicative of all the creative industries in Canada. Going back to segueing to writing a book. I mean, the Canadian publishing industry is in dire straits as well. The music industry, etc. So it's all the creative industries for sure.
And I'm curious, how has social media, if at all, has that had a impact on just kind of like your day-to-day operations, or maybe the way that you will attack a production? Like, has that had any influence over your line of work at all?
Well, I think it does in general because people, your audience, your viewers feel much more connected. Because if you've got your favorite celebrity on Instagram or Facebook or TikTok or whatever, you feel a different connection. So like the hosts of our show, they have a huge following. I mean, I've been out with them in public and it's insane what what happens. I mean, and we're like, wow, we're just a little like Canadian, show. And they're followed, through crowds and stuff like that. So definitely, I think, social media has certainly had a huge impact. And it's just people communicating. I mean, how we used to watch TV because we'd get a guide in our newspaper and that gave us a list of what was available. But now, we're watching things based on what a friend said on social media, or what somebody recommended on social media, or what the buzz is on social media. So it's had a huge impact for sure.
Yeah, I'm always curious about that just because it seems like, and I guess, yeah, that does seem to be the case where it's more about not necessarily a change in like your day-to-day operations, but more so on the platform where people can now become aware of your product.
Yeah, for sure.
Hmm. Very interesting.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so, getting more recent, what are some of the shows? I guess maybe we'll start about 10 years ago. It seems like we left off about there.
Yeah.
What are some of the shows that are kind of note of the last 10 years, and then we'll get into the more recent stuff.
Well, what happened for us, as I said, again, we went through various types of shows. So we did, the repair show, the gardening show. Well, it wasn't a gardening show; it was a flower show. And then, as I said, we got into a number of different cooking series. We did probably 4 or 5 different cooking series, and then I had this crazy idea. My parents had lived in the same house for many years in Etobicoke, and I was always trying to get them to renovate their home and redo like their kitchen, and they wouldn't. My mother was always like, "Oh," my mother was always like, "Those are real wood cabinets, in the kitchen. Like, we're not going to take those." I'm like, "Oh my god!" And I was out. My business partner and I were driving one day, and I said to her, I said, "What do you think about the idea of a show called My Parents' House?" And she said, what are you talking about?" And I said, "Well," and it was just again when design shows, stuff about the home was really starting to explode. And I had been trying to think of like, where would you get the most extreme before and afters? Because the design shows are all about before and after.
Mhm.
And I thought, that's gonna be at your parents' house. So we went and did a little demo at my parents' house, which was pretty hilarious. And every year we would go to the Banff Television Festival. And I met with one of the network executives at HGTV, and I pitched her this idea. I said, you know, it's my parents' house where, you know, two adult children come home and, you know, renovate a room in mom and dad's home. And she was like, love it. Let's do it. And I was like, really? So, I mean, that doesn't, trust me, that doesn't happen very often. So that was our first foray into renovation and design. And we did, I think, 56 episodes of that series.
Wow.
And I ended up, and that was my first foray into directing. I directed over 40 of those episodes. So that was again an interesting challenge. I had never directed before. So I had produced series, I had written series, but I'd never really been like, you know, on set directing. And I just, you know, I don't even remember. I ended up getting thrown into it somehow. Maybe somebody was sick, or you know, that's how these things happen. Just sometimes very accidentally. So ended up directing, as I said, over 40 episodes of that, and that was that was very successful on HGTV. Of course, a lot of people could relate to it, and it was fun. It was always, we had two really great hosts, and we would go into people's homes, and we did a 4-day renovation. So it was kind of real time, and we would work many evenings right through the night. We had a whole construction crew and design crew, and obviously, and sometimes I'd go home late at night, and yeah, I'd leave the crew there, and they'd be working through the night. And then from that, and actually we did this really great animal series too. My business partner and I are both huge animal lovers, and I went to the Women's Network and pitched an idea called Animal Magnetism. And it was a documentary series about people's relationship with animals, not a pets show. It was really about different. We covered every animal from elephants to seals, and it was just about how people help animals and animals help people. And every episode was 3 stories, so we did 78
Wow.
yeah. And again, that's how I, you know, I wrote all of those episodes too, and traveled. That was quite a traveling series, because we went wherever these great stories were. Anyway, getting back to the design. So we finished, we did 3 years in my parents' house. And then again, you know, what year? So this is about 10 years ago, at least. And my business partner and I, we go into the Women's Network, and we're pitching ideas. It's a pitch session that you do, you know, a couple times a year when you're working with networks. And we had various ideas, and, you know, I said we were kind of throwing them against the wall, and nothing's sticking. Like, they're like, yeah, and you can tell when you go into those meetings there, you know, as they gloss over, they're like, oh, okay. You can tell when somebody's instantly interested, right? And it's that sort of elevator pitch that you've got to give. So we're kind of like striking out. We've pretty much struck out with anything that we brought to the table. And then my business partner, literally like on the fly, says, what about an idea called should I stay or should I go? And you saw, you know, these
Stand
executives
up
kind of
straight.
sit
Yeah,
up, yeah, and go, what's that? And so so she explained it. Trust me, I'm sitting at the other side of the table going, what is that? Because she literally made it up on the spot. And I remember walking out of the meeting, and I'm like, where did that come from? Anyway, and the funny thing is, both of those, and I love to talk about those shows. So my parents' house and the should I stay or should I go concept, because both of those came out of real life experiences. So my parents' house was me being frustrated that I couldn't get my parents to renovate their house. The other show, this new show, my business partner was in that exact scenario. So she was living in a home in downtown Toronto, and she was kind of at that place. She'd been there several years, and she was like, you know, should I stay in this home and renovate it? You know, because she'd since had children, et cetera, or should I just sell it and move to something that's going to suit my needs better? Should I stay or should I go? And that's how she'd come. So she was in that, as I said, that real life experience. And that's how she had come up with the idea. So that show went on to become Love It or List It, which is now in its 10th season, and is, shown all over the world. And it became a very, very big production, and quite honestly, just exploded. So there we are. We're all caught up to date.
I definitely have some questions about the love it or list it, but there's kind of two probably pretty dry questions, but I want to back you up because I am just curious about it. So
Yeah.
first one is getting back to your writing, and your first stint on the writing show, and then as you went on your career doing a bit more of that. What was that something that you were maybe nervous, or because it's one of those things like you've never done it before,
Mhm.
and that's a pretty critical aspect of the show.
Yeah.
And so was that something where it was like, oh geez, like a bit intimidating, or was it just, what was your feeling on that?
You know what? I mean, I didn't call myself a writer at the time, but I think it kind of came naturally. And so it was, again, a lot of this stuff, because we would work in lifestyle television, the beginning of lifestyle television. The budgets were actually quite small, so you're always working with a small crew, and most of us were doing 2 or 3 jobs. And that's probably, as I said, probably how I got into doing some writing. Maybe somebody didn't show up that day, or somebody left mid-production. It would have been something like that, where it's like you're literally thrown in and you have no choice. And it's like, oh, okay, I can't hire another writer by tomorrow, so I guess so it was literally trial by fire in those early days, because you did what you did. I mean, I would go out I remember shooting a show about lilacs in Hamilton, because down at the Royal Botanical Gardens in Hamilton, they have one of the world's largest collection of lilac bushes, and we were doing this show on lilacs. And I always remember my cameraman and I, like, hauling all this gear, through the middle of this botanical garden to get to this lilac dell that's in the middle of the garden. But there's nobody else there. There was like him and I. So you're going to haul equipment, and if you got to make a sandwich that afternoon for the crew, you're going to do that. So as I said, a lot of it was just kind of trial by fire. And then when you're writing a show, and certainly anybody at this point who's doing this, it's an ongoing, it's a dynamic process. So you write a script, but then on that day, who knows, things are going to change. It's very organic. So you're always doing rewrites as you go. So yeah, I honestly, I just learned as I went, and really probably didn't have the time or the luxury to think, oh wow, I'm not a writer, why am I doing this? So and what I was doing seemed to be working out, so you just keep going. So, but yes, of course, always, I mean, when I first started directing, I thought, oh, I can't do this. I don't know how to direct people on set. And then, you know, just had no choice, had to kind of go in and do it. And then you got to go, okay, well, that didn't seem too bad. Because I remember saying, like, I mean, cameramen, they've got all sorts of jargon and lingo, and, set up this and the different lights, and you're like, I have no idea, a close up versus a wide shot versus a medium shot. Like, what are you talking about? So the one good thing about that is, if you have a great crew, you're all working and learning together. So at the time, I had to be confident enough and humble enough to be able to say to, my cameraman, you need to help me. We've got 2 people sitting in a chair, and I have to do an interview with them. Okay, how are we going to approach that? Because in a scene like that, you have to get multiple angles and multiple shots. So where are those cameras going to be? And yeah, so hopefully you're working with a very good crew. I mean, I've worked with one cameraman for over 20 years. We have crew that have been that long with us. So it's a great relationship.
That'd be great too, because you have such rapport with that person, and professionally and personally, it must
Yeah.
what a so it must be so refreshing just to have someone so reliable.
Yeah, absolutely. And you say, let's get this set up, and that they're, I mean, a camera, a film crew or a television crew, because you're working, and I would say this about almost all of them, because you're working very long hours, and in a very generally very small, intimate setting, you become very, very close. You're like family. And that's why when you always see these different shows when they do their rap party, or I mean, I watched the end. My husband and I got into the Big Bang Theory just recently, and we watched, the 7 seasons. I can't, maybe it was 12. I mean, it went for a long time. And then that end show, and then they did the, thing after the fact. Like, they would have been, they would have been, everyone would have been bawling on set, because if you've just worked with the same people for over 10 years in that kind of environment, and then it's done, it's very, very emotional. So any of these like reunion shows and things that you see, like as it mentioned about Friends, I mean, yeah, it has such a huge impact on people in their lives when they work that closely with other people.
Based on your experiences being thrust into writing and then directing, what would be like a piece of advice that you could give to someone, or just your perspective to someone who is maybe they're trying to pursue, whether professionally or just as a hobby, some
Mhm.
type of creative endeavor, whether it's writing music or lyrics or art, like just kind of anything. Like, what would you
Yeah.
tell somebody? What would be your perspective on that?
Well, I would always say, follow your passion, and keep going, and keep, because you're going to get knocked, and you're going to get knocked down. That's for sure. But you have to keep going. So I'll give you a perfect example. My neighbor contacted me a few weeks ago, and he said his niece was a recent graduate of film school, I believe, and would I talk to her about the industry, et cetera. And of course, I'm always more than happy and willing to do that. And my advice to her was, of course, because of course the industry is a very tough industry to break into. So my advice to people that are trying to get into the industry and are trying to break in is, you have to keep your foot on that pedal. So if that means that you have to go and do an internship, you have to go and volunteer, that's what you go and do, because you have to get in there to be seen, to be noticed. um, and a lot of people, young people, they'll graduate from a film degree, or in Toronto we have the radio and television arts program at Ryerson, and then they can't get that job. It's very tough, so they go off and they work. Like, I remember my doctor calling me a few years ago and asking me to talk to his daughter, and she had a theater degree, and she was working at a department store. So same advice. Like, yes, of course you have to make a living, and you have to work, and it might not be something related to, say, film or television or the creative arts, but you still got to keep that foot in there. So if you've got a full-time job, or you're working at a department store because you've got to pay the rent, that's great. But on your weekends, get over to that theater school and volunteer if you have to, because that's that. So if you're really passionate about it, you just have to keep, as I said, keep your toe in the water, so to speak, because then eventually you're going to be in the right place at the right time, and you're going to hear about that opportunity, and you're going to get there. So, but it takes time.
So the secret to success is work hard and then work harder.
Exactly. And not be afraid to try different things as well, because people will always, I've found people will always pigeonhole you. So, for example, because I was a television producer, and I produced a reality series called Love It or List It, when I first started pitching my book idea to agents, I was told directly by one agent, you know, what makes you the expert on writing this book? You're a television producer. You can't write this book. And I went like, yes, I can. And I will. And I remember walking away going, oh my God, I was like so deflated. But after I picked myself up off the floor, I kind of, you know what? Yeah, I'm not going to listen to that negativity. And I'm the person to write this book because I'm passionate about the story and I want to tell this story, and I'm willing to put the time and the effort into doing it. So I am the person that's going to tell this story. So, but it's very hard. It's very easy when, you're, as I said, people tell you something or they kind of try to pigeonhole you. It's very hard. It's very easy to kind of go, oh, I can't do this, but you have to keep going. Another quick example that I'll talk to you about is that, my business partner and I, we basically got very involved. We had, a machine, so to speak, of numerous lifestyle shows. One season, I think we had 5 or 6 going, cooking, design, whatever, all these different shows. And I got contacted by somebody who actually I had worked with. She was a casting director and she would cast our shows. And she was a young woman and she came in to see me one day. I'll never forget it. And she said, I have breast cancer. And at the time she was maybe 32. She just had a baby about a year prior. And she was thinking, she said, I want to do something about this, like, make a show or something. And I was like, oh my God. Well, first of all, I couldn't understand why this young woman sitting in front of me had breast cancer. I, like many people, had always thought it was an older woman's disease. And I remember thinking to myself, when I turned 40, that's when you go and you get a mammogram, but never even thought of it before that. So I couldn't understand. So obviously I started, looked into this and did some research and discovered that breast cancer could definitely affect younger women. And if it did affect younger women, it was actually much, much worse, because a lot of the different types of breast cancer are controlled by female hormones, and a younger woman has more estrogen. And so a lot of women, for example, will develop breast cancer just after they've had a baby. This is a very common thing. So if a young woman, so naturally I think, well, if she's young, she's going to be fine. But that I found out that wasn't the case. It could actually be much, much more serious. So from there, I'm telling this story because actually, I mean, it hit me so hard. And I remember I went to my business partner and I said, I want to do a documentary. And she said, well, what do you mean? And I said, I want to shoot a documentary about young women with breast cancer, because I think so many people aren't aware of this. And I think it's just really, really important to get this message out. And so off I went. And I mean, that had to be probably the most terrifying experience that I've ever gone through professionally, because I had no idea. I'd never done a documentary before. And I ended up shooting, following 5 women for 2 years. And, this was a very, very intimate story of their lives that I was telling, and I was with their families, and I was in hospital rooms with them. And again, I had no idea. And I always remember one of the first shoots that we did. We were going into a hospital room up at Sunnybrook. One of the young women was getting her chemo appointment. And of course, being the television producer that I was, I call up 5 or 6 of my guys and go, okay, guys, meet me up at Sunnybrook. We're going to shoot this. And I get up, I've got my cameraman and my sound guy and a camera assistant and whoever else. And we get up there. And I realize very quickly, I can't take this crew into a hospital room. And so literally had to ask my cameraman, how do you turn your camera on? Because I have to go in and do this myself.
Holy
Yeah. No, I'm not kidding you. And they of course understood. They saw what the situation was. They knew. And how do you, yeah, how do you mic somebody up? Um, and and as I said, that was, one of the most valuable experiences I ever had. But again, just realized in the moment, I can't do what I'm normally doing. Anyway, so that was, as I said, taking something on that I really felt, I was so intimidated about, so concerned about, so worried that I wouldn't, that I wanted to be able to tell their stories accurately. And sadly, two of the women, including the woman that I knew, the casting director, two of them passed away just after we finished shooting. Both of them were 36 at the time. Both had young children. So it was a very hard thing to go through. And I have to say, I haven't shot another documentary since. But it was one of the most incredible experiences I ever had as well. So
And was that a documentary series or a film?
it was a film. It's called "I Don't Have Time for This," and the Women's Network ended up buying it, purchasing it, and airing it, and then it sold, and it sold all over the world. That's the other aspect of the business that we haven't talked about, which is distribution and how products get sold around the world. And I always, this is several years ago now, but I remember I would get notes and emails from people from around the world, women from around the world who had seen the program. So it was a very wonderful experience to go through.
A couple episodes ago, I had Janie Brown and Daphne Lobb come on the show, and they're both involved in oncology. Daphne's oncology GP, and Janie's oncology nurse and author. And we covered her book on the podcast, and it was all about every chapter was a different person's story.
Oh,
And
wonderful.
I mean, great book. We covered it, and we're going to be doing part 2 soon. And yeah, those experiences are especially, I mean, anyone dying of cancer at any age is obviously, it's terrible. But,
Yeah.
certainly when they're, younger, and when it kind of, I guess we kind of all have an idea of like when it makes sense to die, quote unquote.
Right.
Like we have that idea. And then when
Yeah.
you go through those experiences and or hear other people's experiences with it that just don't equate, it's just, oh,
Yeah.
brutal.
Well, and again, at the time, I mean, one of the women I followed, she was 25, and
Oh
she had found a lump on her breast, and she went to the doctors, and they said, "Well, don't worry about it. You're 25.
oh my
Of course you don't have cancer." No, I'm not kidding. And of course it turned out she did. So she was because she went and said, "I'd like to have a mammogram," and they said, "We're not going to give you." She was actually refused a mammogram. Now, again, as I said, I think I hopefully time and education has changed a lot of that. But when we were shooting that documentary, she had been initially refused a mammogram because of her age. So. And the other thing that hits young women with respect to breast cancer is fertility. And if you're going to go through breast cancer, I mean, the amount of the drugs that you're going to be taking will potentially wipe away your fertility. So that was another big issue. So we were going to the fertility clinics and freezing eggs before you go through this process. So it's not just I've got breast cancer and I have to deal with it. I've got breast cancer, but what if I want to have children? So yeah.
Certainly learn a lot doing, I mean, not just like personally, but medically too, like understanding those things. I mean, especially as yourself being a woman too, that's primarily a woman's issue. I mean, men can get breast cancer too. I mean, that
Yep,
actually does
absolutely.
happen.
Yep.
But I mean, certainly for you, that must have been a positive experience in that way, where it was very, very educational, albeit
Yeah.
difficult, but.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And so kind of the segue off that, kind of related, but just as far as a bit of a dry question, I guess, but what's sort of the difference between a producer and director, just as far as, well, yeah, I'll just throw that to you. Like, what's the difference as far as the job approach?
So the producer is basically, there's executive producer and there's producer, director, and there's obviously many other jobs. There's associate producer, and but so executive producer. I'm the executive producer of Love It or List It, which basically, I mean, in Canada and the US, it's a slightly different because, again, as I said, with respect to ownership, things like that in Canada. But that's basically the person who is financially responsible for the production. They control the budget, and they have potentially invested. Like if you look at movies or programs in the US, you'll see maybe a dozen executive producers, and those are all the different individuals or companies that have invested into that budget. So basically for us, we are the executive producers, which means, as I said, we financially, we are 100% responsible for everything related to the production. We are responsible to the network for the program and meeting all of their needs, and we are responsible for the finances. So and how that is financed, and then again how the budget is allocated. A producer is the on the ground person who is organizing everything related to that shoot, to that production, and hiring all the other crew that you will need. So they're basically the boss on set. Executive producers, you generally you wouldn't find them on set. They'll go and visit, of course, and say hi and have a cup of coffee, all that kind of stuff. But you're not physically doing anything on that set. Whereas the producer is in control, and then of course the director is working with the talent and creating the program. So.
I know it might be a bit of a silly question for you, but I actually never knew that. So I'm glad I asked the question, because now
Oh, no, it's not silly. It's not silly at all.
So
So,
now let's get into Love It or List It a bit. So
yeah.
the original, because I know there's a Love It or List It Vancouver,
So
and
it was, yeah, we finished that. We
there you
did
go.
5
Okay,
years
so I
of
didn't know
that.
that. Okay,
Yeah. Yeah. So because things are always in reruns, right? So, and then when we finished it, then we're editing the show. So then it would air probably like a year after the fact. So yeah, we finished that actually just at the end of 2019, just, before everything related to COVID happened. That was a great experience. It was wonderful. We had a whole great crew in Vancouver for over 5 years. And so as I said, that has ended, and we the original show, which originally started in Toronto, so we did, I guess, 5 seasons in Toronto, and then the HUTV in the US decided that they wanted to become the lead broadcaster on the show versus the Canadian network. So we agreed to that because the show went down into the US and became very, very popular. So then we ended up taking the show down to North Carolina. And we've been shooting down there for the last 5 years. And we just brought this show back to Toronto, which is really, really terrific. So so we're just starting shooting back here in Toronto and GTA, actually, in Southern Ontario. So.
well, and actually, I got a question about going down to the States, but I'm not sure if you described it already. I think with the parents' place, parents' house, we talked about that. But what's the actual format of the Love It or List It?
So Love It Listed is that, yeah, should I stay or should I go? So it's about it's a very realistic situation that many homeowners go through, that you've bought a house, you've been in a house, and then your life circumstances change, and there's something about, a lot of times it's because people have had a few children, or maybe grandparents have moved in, particularly now, and then of course working at home. I mean, things change, like during your different life stages. So you get to a place and you say, you know what, this home just isn't, like, it's not working for us. We need 2 more bedrooms. We don't, the basement's, whatever it happens to be. So again, it's like, do we put the money into renovating this house so it does suit all of our needs? Or do we just say, okay, that's it, we're done here, and we're going to find a home that better suits our needs? So we have a designer and a realtor who are kind of competing for the homeowner. And the designer the people leave the home, and the designer and her team rework what they have requested as best as she can, because there's always a budget in place and you can't do everything. And there's always, people always ask me this, like, oh, when things happen on the show, are they real? And if you've ever done a major renovation in a home, you'd know that, as soon as you start taking down walls and things like that, you're ultimately going to find surprises. And I mean, I've been through a few myself, so I know how frustrating they can be. So yes, those are real issues, real problems. And then the realtor, in the meantime, so while their home is being redesigned, our realtor host is taking them and trying to convince them to buy a new home. And it's hard. It's a hard decision. Very hard.
Well, because it's real, it actually is real people. They're not like actors and, oh, this is my house,
No. And then of course you walk back into your home, and you're like, oh my God, because of course the designers, I mean, I'm always in awe of what designers do. So you walk in and it's not even your home. I mean, you're like, this is amazing. So it's, but even though sometimes the home is beautiful and things have been redone, but maybe you still couldn't get, there's a lot of times where Hillary can't do everything. Like maybe she can't give you that fourth bedroom or something, so you're not generally not going to get absolutely everything. The house is still, going to be your house. So maybe, maybe that other house down the road is ultimately better. So it's a tough decision for many people.
I do enjoy the show.
I've been through it myself a few times, and yeah, it's hard because you're also very I mean, I was saying this to my husband just the other day. I said, every home I've bought and sold, I've always had such a strong emotional attachment to my homes, that it's, I go by like a few other homes I've owned in Toronto. I drive by, lovingly, and kind of just peek at them every once in a while, because you have a connection to these places that you've lived in. So it's hard to give them up. I just went through it last year. I've been in this new home for 6 months, and I still think lovingly of my old home that's not too far away. And honestly, actually, that one, it's too raw. I haven't even driven by because I think I'd be too upset. So I haven't even gone by yet. So.
Well, they become part of your life story, so it makes sense.
Absolutely.
You live there, you laugh there, cry there, it becomes part of you,
Yeah. The kids grew up there, and you've got, all their heights on the wall somewhere, and stuff like that. So, but people are much more mobile. I mean, when I grew up, I grew up in this one house, and my mother is still in that house. So there wasn't as much mobility when, years ago, people kind of bought a house and that was it. Whereas now that's obviously changed quite a bit. So.
I did say earlier, I kind of interrupted you. It might have been a bit of a delay on the feed there, but I said I do enjoy the show. I've obviously I'm a bit more biased to the Vancouver show just because it's more relatable. But the funniest thing with that, and Toronto housing market is expensive, but we always the running joke with the Vancouver show is, because you kind of know where the houses are more or less. Mm-hmm. And we always laugh like, oh, look at that piece of crap house with $2 million. Oh my God, It's crazy.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, and you know what? And Vancouver was ahead of Toronto. So when we were shooting in Toronto, as I said, this is several years ago now. I mean, of course, the prices were high, and one of the issues and why we ended up shifting it to the U.S. is because the show had become very, very popular in the U.S., but the Americans could not relate to the prices that we were talking about. They're like, what do you do? What? That's insane. And so we went, people always ask me, why did you go to North Carolina? And the network chose it because it's kind of middle America. And when we first went down to North Carolina, and and even to this day, I mean, you can buy a spectacular house down there for 3, 4, $500,000. I mean, US, but still. And so people can relate to that. And they were, but so the funny thing is though, when we were shooting in Toronto, and then we went and set up in Vancouver, even Torontonians were going, what's going on with these houses? Like, we couldn't believe it. You know, it's some cottage somewhere, and you're, yeah, it's like 2.5 million. You could have, it's like you, because Toronto had not hit that level yet when we first went out to Vancouver. So we were shocked as well, absolutely shocked what was going on in Vancouver. So we're thrilled to be back in Canada with the show. We're thrilled to be back in Toronto. So it's a very exciting time for the show. And we've, you know, knock on wood, we've just been very, very fortunate because Love It or List It would be one of the, I'd say one of the longest running Canadian shows and one of the most successful Canadian formats. And when I say formats, that means we have sold the concept of the show. Like, you know how Canadians have bought like you know, all the American formats. Like America's Got Talent, so Canada's Got Talent, and the Canadian the what's it called, the Amazing Race Canada. So those are formats that you're buying, and that allows you to produce the show in your country. And Love It or List It is one of the most successful Canadian formats that's actually gone out into the world, because Canada's used to buying them, but we don't really make them. So we've been very, very fortunate. So there's a series in right now in Australia, which is Love It or List It Australia, which is really good. It's 2 guys that host it, and they're absolutely hilarious. There's a long running version of it in England, and then there's been other ones in France, Germany, Belgium. So it's been very very well received, because you know, it doesn't matter what country you live in, you still relate to the idea. So
Well, and congratulations on that. I mean, that's a huge accomplishment. That must be kind of surreal too, to think like how it started off as a off the cuff, hey, I got an idea in a pitch
yeah,
meeting, and then now it's
yeah,
multinational, licensed internationally, and
yeah.
must be incredible.
Yeah, it has been incredible, and we're, you know, as I said, we've been very, very fortunate, and as I mentioned before, we've had, you know, long-term crew on it that you know, that make the show what it is. So
And for the future of the show, insofar as you're involved, is that Toronto, and keep going forward with that, and then see what happens?
yeah, we're just going to keep going from there. I don't think that we would personally do any other additional formats. We did one season. It was called Love It or List It Vacation Homes, and that was fun. Actually, it was good, because so we were doing like cottages and ski chalets and things like that. So we enjoyed doing that one. That, you know, who knows, that could potentially happen again. But yeah, this one particular one is back in Toronto. Will keep us busy. And we have some other you know, show concepts and things like that that are coming out, bubbling up. But everything got, of course, delayed because of COVID. So we had a couple other productions that were potentially ready to go, but as I said, they got delayed because of COVID. So onwards we go.
No, that's great to hear. Looking forward to it. I'll start
Mhm.
watching them when the new ones come out. I'll start taking a peek. Yeah.
Yeah.
By the way, I on the last with Janie and Daphne, I joked at the beginning, because it's a hardcover book, and I have this weird thing where if I'm reading the book, I can't read it with the sleeve. It bothers me. I don't know
Oh
why.
yeah, yeah.
Weird about me. But what I really like about this book is that it's kind of like a hardcover paperback style. So it actually the things
It's
built
like
in.
a combo.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
it feels great. So
It's actually a special name for them, and that type, and I can't remember what it is right now, but it's like yeah, they actually have a name for it in the publishing world. What that book cover is, because it's not a paperback, it's not a
right.
hardcover, it's kind of like in between.
And it's got
Yeah.
like a good, I know this is like such a weird detail, but it's got a good like feel to it. Like I know I'm
Hefty.
a kinesthetic learner, so touch is like a big deal, but yeah,
Yeah.
anyway, Total sidebar. Okay, let's do this. Introduction. 50 years ago, on April 14th, 1971, a small group of inmates at Kingston Penitentiary, Canada's oldest prison, overpowered unsuspecting guards and instigated what was to become one of the most violent and devastating prison riots in our country's history. The early 1970s was a time of great political and social upheaval, and what was happening in our prisons reflected that change. Deteriorating prison conditions and the increasing awareness of basic human rights were creating a combustible penal environment both in Canada and south of the border. The civil rights movement of the 1960s had given rise to a new breed of inmate, politically aware young men with radical ideas of rights and freedoms. Prisoners wanted to be treated like humans instead of numbers, and they were demanding to be heard. "You have taken our civil rights, but we want our human rights," read a banner hanging outside the prison walls in Kingston during the riot. And so we'll stop there. Just kind of sets the basic premise of this book.
Mm.
So first of all, we've been talking about your career, and what I love about that, it's always kind of reminds me too, like when you read about, I'm particularly interested in sports. And so like when you read about how Tom Brady got started, well, he got subbed in for the starting quarterback at the time, and the rest is history. And you kind of see that motif play over and over, and whether it's acting, any avenue, really, you can always find that. And certainly with your career, there's elements of that where it's like, oh, I'm a writer and now I'm a director and cameraman. And, it just kind of all happens. And then Love It or List It, obviously great show, and starts off just off the cuff. It's fantastic. And so where does this book fit in that?
That's a good question. I have no idea, to tell you the truth.
There you go.
No, I will tell you. So what happened was, moving along in my career in television, the way that my business partner and I separated out the company is that I was sort of the creative end, and she was more of the business end, which meant, so I was like writing, show ideas, pitch documents, scripts, and always looking for different ideas. And she was like, she's running the budgets and things like that. So that's how we kind of separated things out based on our personalities. I mean, she would call me and say, "Hey, I'm, working on the budget for, whatever." And I'd say, "No, thank you." So, because our offices are beside each other, we're like, "Yeah, no, I'm not coming in." Anyway, so I had been writing for a number of years, obviously for my work. And I came to the point where I thought, I really enjoy writing, but I want to write for myself. I don't want to just be writing for, what I do for a living. So I signed up for a program at the University of Toronto, which was a certificate in creative writing, and started taking writing courses, and all different types of courses. So, short fiction. I did take a screenwriting course, children's fiction, memoir writing, all different things. And I really enjoyed it. And of course that certainly helped me in my work as well. I mean, the two, I couldn't really separate out the two, but it was really enjoyable. As I said, it was kind of more for me. And then I started a program in one of the programs in creative nonfiction. And honestly, I wouldn't have even known what it was at the time. And I thought, I kind of really like this genre, and started looking at different books within that genre, Canadian writers, and historical creative nonfiction. And quite honestly, I hit upon one Canadian author. Her name is Charlotte Gray, and she's written quite a few books, and she's an excellent author. And when I read some of her books, I went, you know what? This is exactly the kind of writing that I would like to do. It's historical. It's a really compelling story, et cetera, et cetera. So I kind of knew what type of book or what type of writing I was really attracted to. Anyway, long story short, the professor of that program approached me. We were doing different, writing exercises and things like that. And he approached me and he said, would you be interested in doing a master's in fine arts in creative nonfiction? Have you ever thought of that? And I said, well, no, I haven't thought of that because I've got a full-time career. And because he said there's this program at King's University of Kings in Halifax, and it's a 2-year program, writing program in nonfiction. And again, I said, well, no, I can't move to Halifax. And he said, well, it's something called low res. And I said, oh, what does that mean? He said, well, it's low residency requirements. And what that meant was that it was a 2-year program. And for 2 weeks each summer, you had to be in Halifax to work with the teachers and the mentors and with the other students. And then there was a 1-week residency in New York and a 1-week residency in Toronto. So in a 2-year program, it was 2, 4, 6 weeks that you had to be somewhere else. So I thought, well, you know what, I could maybe manage that. That sounds good. And also honestly, it was a nice excuse to get out and hang out in Halifax for a few weeks each summer. So, spoke to my business partner and I said, I'm kind of thinking of doing this. What do you think? And she said, yeah, you know what, you should go for it. So off I went to Halifax. So this is the summer of 2016. And part of the program was that to get into the program, you had to have a book proposal.
Yeah.
And I did not have a book proposal. And honestly, as much as I was enjoying writing, I really had I didn't have that sort of burning, bucket list. I want to write a book. I loved writing. I've written a few articles for like the Globe and Mail, things like that, but I had never really thought about a book. But now I've got to think about a book because they've just let me into this program and they're expecting a book proposal. So, and again, long story short, I had found about a year before I started the program, I had, opening up the paper one day, the Globe and Mail, and on the inside cover of the Globe and Mail, every day they have a little section. It's called like this day in history. And I just happened to see this little article. I still have it somewhere in my office here. And it was a picture of Kingston Penitentiary. And it talked about this riot in 1971 and what happened and et cetera, et cetera. And I'm like, wow, that's really interesting. I've never heard of this. And I knew it was April of 1971. The one thing I had heard about and that I did know was that was the same year that Attica, the very famous Attica prison riot had happened in upstate New York. So I thought this is really interesting. Why have I never heard about this Canadian one? So I did what I do with a lot of those kind of things. I cut it out from the paper and, being a television producer and creating different ideas all the time, I have folders on my desk that are basically ideas folders. And it's just like something, will strike you, something interesting, or you read about some personality and you're like, oh, okay, I'm just going to keep that aside. So and so when I got into the program at King's, I went, you know what? I remember that story about a riot. Let me go and find that piece of paper and start looking into it. So when I flew down to Halifax, I had a single piece of paper, a scrap of paper. So and then the first week of the program of the residency, we started on the Monday, and by the Friday you had to stand up in front of the whole group and pitch your book idea. I'm like, okay, this is going to be interesting. But anyway, so I just, went to class during the day and worked, diligently through the night, researching everything that I could about that riot. And honestly, as soon as I started researching it and getting into it, I thought, wow, this is an incredible story that I think many, many people haven't heard about. So that's how it all began. And worked for 2 years, developing the idea, researching the idea, writing, as I said, with mentors through the program. And then the program ended. And that was interesting because I thought, wow, okay, now what do? I have to go back to work full time. And I've got kind of a book here. I mean, I was probably about, I probably had half a manuscript at that point. So I took actually a little bit of a leave of absence from the TV world, and just kept going and said, no, I definitely want to tell this story. So 4 years later, here we are. 4 or 5 years later. Yeah.
A quick side note, because I have another question relating to that, but that actually makes a lot of sense to me as the reader to hear that process on how this book was written, because it reads like a novel. Like it doesn't have a I mean, I've been pretty fortunate. Like I really haven't read that many like uninteresting books. Like pretty much every book I've read on any topic has been pretty good. But definitely this one where like it really has that it's yeah, it doesn't read like a dry piece of history. It's like,
Mhm.
holy
Yeah.
crap, like you gotta keep going.
Yeah.
Like, wow.
Yeah, and that's what creative nonfiction, because nonfiction is traditionally, a memoir, or could be historical, or could be academic. It's real. And then this genre kind of actually really started, I believe, with Truman Capote and In Cold Blood. That's one of
Very
the
famous.
the very famous and one of the original books of this creative nonfiction genre. And I actually have it here in my library, and I've reread it. So if you go back and reread that, because yeah, people were, as I said, you were either writing fiction, or nonfiction tended to be dry. And then somebody like Truman Capote came along and said, you know what, we can make this more interesting. So it reads like fiction, but the number one rule of creative nonfiction when you're writing it, and I remember they gave us all a sticker on our first day in our program, with the acronym of basically you can't make shit up. That's what they said, and I have that in a sticker somewhere on a binder, and that's very, very difficult, because when you're writing a historical nonfiction, you're relying on a lot of old resources, and you get to places where, which I did in the storyline, where you're like, I can't find anything about X, Y, or Z. So and that's why it takes a long time. As I said, that the book took me 4 years to research and write. Very, very time consuming.
And
So
that actually is a perfect segue to my next question, which is when it comes to investigating historical documents, or you can use the internet, try and find stuff, books, archives. Like for something like this, probably a number of ways to find that information. What were some of the challenges when it came to, a little more specifically, when it came to actually getting the facts?
so one of the biggest challenges that I had in writing the book, and I talk about it in the book, is that I was writing about an organization, our prison system in Canada, that the Canadian Corrections does not really want to talk about. So it's a very closed, secretive organization, to tell you the truth. So when I first started out, again, this is my first book, so I was quite naive. I drove up to Kingston. I'm like, oh, I'm gonna go into the belly of the beast, and talk to whoever I can talk to about this story, and there's a penitentiary museum right across from Kingston Penitentiary, because they closed the prison in 2013. But the Canadian Penitentiary Museum for all penitentiaries across Canada is right across the street. So I, marched up there and said, I'm writing this story about the 1971 prison riot that happened, on the other side of the road. And they kind of looked at me and said, oh yeah, no, we don't have anything about that. And I was like, really? You have all of the penitentiary records. You don't have anything?
Kind of a
Yeah.
small thing to leave out.
Yeah. Really? So that was my trial by fire, and I went, oh, okay, now I realize what's going to happen here. So but again, that just kind of encouraged me even more. As soon as somebody said, I don't know if it's the red hair or my Irish temper, but as soon as somebody says no, I'm like, yeah, I'm going to do that. Don't shut that door on my face, because I'm coming in. So yeah, so then what I did, I went to the archives, Ontario Archives. I'd never been to archives before, and having to understand what that whole process was, because I thought it was just like a library and I could just like take stuff out. And like, no, you've got to put some white gloves on. And then we're going to give you some of these materials, but you cannot remove them. And yeah, it was like, wow, this is interesting. So that was, again, a whole new experience for me. Going down to the Toronto Reference Library and going into, there's a microfiche whole room there that has all the main newspapers across the world. So just going through that microfilm, and trying not to break the machine when the things would spin off the reels. And then I also actually, which I think really saved me, was I hired an archivist in Ottawa, because I couldn't get to the Ottawa archives, and I found out that a lot of the government records were there. So if you go to the Archives of Canada, you'll see on their website that they will say, here's names of archivists that you can actually hire, because they're there and they know what they're doing. So I hired a gentleman in Ottawa who worked with me, and was just a lifesaver, because he knew where to go, he knew where to look, and then he would send me, because as I said, most of these are all government documents that have been long buried, but he knew how to find them, which most you have to, he has a specialization, that's what he does. So that was very, very helpful.
And did you form a conclusion as to why there was so much red tape and just kind of hoops to jump through on, like, when it comes to the prison rat?
Well, it's the reality, as I said, that's the reality of the Canadian correctional system. It's a very opaque organization, and if you looked online to find out when's the last time, say, a Canadian journalist was in any of our federal penitentiaries, I think you'd be looking for a long time. And if you think about it, you're not seeing stories from prisons, from any of our prisons, because they don't let anybody in. The first thing I did, actually, when I started the book, is I actually contacted them, and I said, because they have a whole public relations group, and I said, this is what I'm doing, and I'd love to come up to Kingston to do the tour of the penitentiary, but because I'm writing this book, I'd like to do kind of like more of a media tour, and they said, okay, we'll put your request in, and we'll get back to you. I'm actually, that was in 2016, and I think I'm still waiting for the answer on that. So that's why I drove up to Kingston and got a ticket to the public tours. And I've been on two tours, which is fascinating. I would highly recommend, if anyone's in the Kingston area, to get a ticket to the public tour that they do. Yeah, so that, and they have not changed, and that, quite honestly, is probably the biggest message that I can extend with respect to this story, is that everything that I write about that was happening in 1971 in a federal penitentiary in Canada is still happening 50 years later. So because there is no transparency, there is no external, there's no external organization kind of keeping an eye on what is going on in there. So they're not answerable to anybody.
Well, and that's why, books like this are important, because then you get a window into what has happened, and, an idea of what's happening moving forward. Yeah, certainly. Jumping just kind of right in the middle of just a short little paragraph, right in the middle of the introduction here. You're just kind of, at this point, you're just discussing how different perspectives are important to getting the picture as to what happened and why that matters. And back to the book. There are other voices too, voices from a different perspective, but equally poignant in retelling of the story. I interviewed inmates who took part in the riot, including one who was ultimately charged with murder. As a 17-year-old petty thief, Robbie Robidoux was thrust into a world where he learned how to fight in order to stay alive. Kingston Pen was the big house, and every inmate lived by the convict's code. Stool pigeons and sex offenders were the lowest of the low, and to this day, he has little remorse about killing one of them. So, just a really short question and then a larger question. What's a stool pigeon? I don't know if I want to know, but what is that
Well,
term?
stool pigeon is a rat. Do you know what a rat is?
I know what that is.
So somebody who tells.
How did that like I'm curious, like how did that term?
You know what? I honestly, I don't know. That's a very, it's a very old expression, but they generally call them rats. So in the prison language lingo, it's usually a rat.
Mhm.
So
Interesting.
yeah, stool pigeon. It's good. It's a good question. It's
I'm just kind
probably
of wondering. Yeah, I'm like, seems like an odd. I thought it
probably
was going to be something completely different, but okay, that makes sense.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, because they used to use pigeons like during the war. They would pigeons were carriers. They would carry messages. They
Right.
put like little messages around their legs and things like that. So that's part of like the pigeon will tell. So a stoolie again is another. So is another word that was used for telltales. So stoolie and pigeon. Yeah, that's probably how it came together.
There you go. Little
We're gonna
linguistic.
have to, we're gonna have to Google that.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
like that. Yeah, interesting.
yeah,
But kind of the bigger question with just that little paragraph. What was that experience like talking to Robbie?
yeah. Very interesting experience because I was in contact with somebody that knew him, that had worked with him through rehabilitation programs and things like that, and we set up a call. He's out in the West Coast, and I honestly I was like, wow, because I at that point like I knew who Robbie Robidoux was before I spoke with him, and I knew what his role was in the riot. So it was very intimidating to get on the phone call with this individual, knowing what I knew. And but it was fascinating because I will clearly say that by the end of that phone call, I had such a different perspective on who this individual was, because as I mentioned in the book, this was a kid who was a very typical inmate. Came from a violent, broken home, was in foster care by the age of 7. And from foster care, he went to juvenile detention homes. From juvenile detention homes, he went to, you know, provincial prison, et cetera, et cetera. And what they would do is they would just graduate up the system until at 17, he's in a federal penitentiary. He's in Kingston Penitentiary. So as he said to me, he said, I'm just a product of this system. And I learned to become a fighting machine, because in that system, in that world, it's either, kill or be killed. So you have to make that decision as a young person. And I've spoken with many Robbie Robidouxs since then. I just did a podcast about a young man. His name was Ty Khan, and he was the last man to ever escape from Kingston Penitentiary. And it's the exact same story. Again, product of the system, foster care, group homes. So it's very tragic. And these, in 1971, the vast majority of the guys in there were 17, 18, 19-year-olds. And they're most of them were petty thieves as well, because what would happen is that you're a 14-year-old kid and you steal something, or you steal a car, and then you're put in a group home or juvenile delinquent facility, and then you get out, and then you kind of do some other silly petty thing, and then your sentences are just getting added on. And for federal penitentiary, any sentence 2 years plus a day, you're off to a Kingston Penitentiary. So this is what would happen. Now, these weren't hardened criminals. They were like, kids, petty thieves, that kind of thing. But then all of a sudden they're doing big time. hard time in a very unforgiving environment.
And you would think and we'll get into a bit of the kind of dark side of Kingston, but for a prison where it's hard knocks, I think is an understatement. You would expect to find, kind of your run of the mill antisocial, violent behavior, criminals, murder and aggravated assault, things that are pretty serious. But that wasn't the case. And anyway, we'll get into that, and it's also in the book for the reader as well.
The interesting thing about that time frame, and I do talk about it in the book, is that 1971, it was before, it was just on the cusp of drugs entering the prison system. And once drugs got into the prison system, then gangs got into the prison system, and who was going to control that drug trade, as it would be very much probably to this day. And this was just before that, so there wasn't that element.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that's pretty critical, especially when more so, particularly in the States, once the war on drugs, that horrible idea, once that kicked off, that really changed the makeup of the prison systems. And nationally, absolutely, it's kind of had a similar effect, but certainly observable in the US. The introduction ends, and you kind of alluded, you made a comment about it earlier, but it's a quote by Dostoevsky. Love him. He's a brilliant writer. Great quote. And the quote is, "The degree of civilization in a society can be judged by entering its prisons. But how are we," and then your note is, "But how are we to judge if we are still not even allowed to see inside?" Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's
exactly. And we're still not allowed to see inside. So
page 10, in total 78 men from range 2 were gathered in the prison gym that night, referring to April 14th. William Billy Knight, prisoner number 6622, was one of them. Everyone at KP, as the Kingston Penitentiary was nicknamed, knew Billy Knight. As the prison barber, he interacted with most of the inmates. Cutting hair was a trade he had picked up over the years while incarcerated. Strict adherence to personal grooming was one of the basic rules on the inside. Hair had to be short, and beards and mustaches were not permitted. When inmates came out of the hole, or solitary confinement, they were immediately handed off to Knight for the removal of any unruly hair growth. Fancying himself a fashionable guy despite his less than stylish surroundings, Billy's hair was always meticulously groomed into a high 1940s pompadour, each strand of hair wet combed to stand out in a high front wave above his forehead. A well-liked mouthy type, Knight never backed down from an argument. He was a strong advocate for exposing conditions within the prison and was always making impassioned speeches for anyone to listen. If anyone had a grievance with the administration, as many did, they knew to talk to Knight about it. He was a natural leader among the inmates. He was even writing a book called The Walking Dead, an autobiography and expose of prison life. He claimed it was going to revolutionize the system. So what was that discovery like for you? I mean, and Billy, he's pretty predominant character, if you will, later on. But just those two paragraphs, so many interesting things to talk about. But I'll just kind of generally throw it to you. Just talk a little bit about Billy.
So Billy Knight, I mean, he instigated the riot, and from what I learned and gathered, he was certainly quite a character. And again, very similar to what I just said. He was a petty criminal, petty thief, had kind of grown up through the system. And, I know once he was charged because he broke into a store in Kingston and stole some, cigarettes and some clothing. So, stuff like that. And then he ended up in Kingston Penitentiary. The funny, interesting thing about Billy Knight was I had kind of gotten wind about the fact that he had written this manuscript. but I couldn't find any evidence of it. And again, when you're going through all these documents and things, you're like, okay, is this true? Is it not true? And I can't put it in unless I've really, clarified. So the manuscript, The Walking Dead, I'm like, okay, well, maybe that's just hearsay. I don't know. I actually found Billy Knight's lawyer. So Billy Knight is charged after the prison riot, and I was going through some documents and I see the name of a lawyer, and I'm like, oh, okay. So as anytime I'd see a name, of course, I'm going to Google it. Many of the people that were involved in the story have since passed away, but I thought, okay, let me check this name. And sure enough, this lawyer is actually still practicing. He's in his mid 80s. He's not far from me in Toronto. A wonderful man by the name of Barry Swadron, had an incredible legal career. And so I email him and say, hey, this is who I am and this is what I'm doing. And do you remember a client by the name of, William Billy Knight? And he's, oh yeah, of course, of course. And that story of how he represents him later in the book is quite an interesting story. Anyway, so he said, yeah, come on down, to my offices just down on Berkeley Avenue. So I went down one day and met this gentleman. As I said, he was very, very lovely. And so we're talking about Billy Knight, and he's telling me about this guy and this recollecting that time frame, which is again many years ago. And I said to him, I said, by the way, I said, I've heard about this, that he was maybe writing, he'd maybe written a manuscript, and he wanted to get this story out and blah blah blah. And Mr. Swadron looks at me and he says, he's kind of thinking, he said, yeah, I might have that down in the basement. Say, what? What do you mean? And he's like, yeah, you know what? He gave it to me because he wanted me to get it out to publishers. And I'm thinking, you've got to be kidding. And he said, you know what? He said, but I've thrown away a lot of my records, old records and stuff. So he said, give me a day and let me see. And as I said, this is man in his like mid 80s. So the next day he calls me and he's like, I've got it here if you'd like to come and get it. So I just couldn't. So I actually have that original manuscript, handwritten in Billy Knight's handwriting. And it was, about this thick, is quite thick. And I thought, and I couldn't read it. And it's on like, legal size paper. But I couldn't make out his writing. So I thought, what am I going to do with this? So my husband is a lawyer, and he has a legal assistant. And he said, my legal assistant, because they're used to kind of seeing documents like this. She if you hire her, maybe she can do this just as a side, on the side, and take her time. So I ended up calling this young lady and said, I don't know how much you'll even be able to decipher. So sent it off to her, and probably a month later, I got this fully, typed out manuscript. So what I'm actually trying to do with that manuscript, I have a Facebook page dedicated to the 1971 riot. And I've put it out a few times because a lot of people are contacting me on that Facebook page and saying, oh, I was there, or I knew Billy Knight, or I knew so-and-so. And so a few times when somebody said, oh, I knew Billy Knight, I've put it back out there. Like I knew he had 2 daughters. And so I would like to get this actual original manuscript back to his family. It doesn't belong with me. So I'm gonna keep working on getting that into the hands it should be in. So, but it was just such a crazy stroke of luck. I couldn't believe it.
Well, that's Billy's Gulag Archipelago. That's
Yeah.
what it is, really.
Yeah.
It's that
Yeah.
side, we're gonna blow the lid off this place kind of thing.
Yeah. And that's how, like at the beginning of the book, I have his whole childhood history because he wrote all that in his manuscript, about his childhood and he had a younger brother that he got hit by a car and was killed, and so that's how I was able to get that information, because it was right from his own handwriting. So
That was really funny when you were saying, as soon as you said, my husband, he's a lawyer, I knew exactly where that was going. He's either
yeah.
giving it to an articling student or he's giving it to his assistant.
Yeah. But honestly, I paid her separately.
I
So,
can hear it.
yeah,
So funny.
yeah.
I mean, yeah, that's a, and so the manuscript, is that, is that published or
No,
officially
he
published?
never got it published. As I said, he gave it to his lawyer to try to send out. And actually, I have a number of letters from publishers that, had looked at it, because what happened, gosh, I'm trying to think, around the same time was a very famous prison book was written by Roger Caron. It was called Go Boy. And that was Roger Caron's personal memoir and experiences of being in federal prison, including Kingston Pen, and it won the Governor General's Award that year. So I think there was this idea that, for Billy Knight, that, if Roger Caron can get his story out, maybe I can get mine out. And then Roger Caron wrote a second book called Bingo, which was about the Kingston Penitentiary riot. So my book is the second book that has been written about this particular riot. So I had this wonderful resource that was written, I think it was published in 72 or 73. Well, actually, I don't know. I have it here somewhere in the office. But anyway, and Roger Caron lived through this riot and he wrote about it. But what I was told at the time was by like other people was kind of like, don't believe everything that you've read in that book. It's not, necessarily all true. He may have embellished, because he had since passed away. So I thought, okay. So I said, okay, I've got to go. I can't talk about anything that Roger Caron wrote about again, unless I verify it. So I was able to finally, through freedom of information and all sorts of, jumping through all sorts of hoops, I was able to finally get the original trial transcripts of what had happened. And these were, again, because people were charged with murder. So these were the eyewitness accounts, these other inmates that risked their own lives in testifying against, other inmates. And it was all, again, their words, the original words of what happened. So I was actually able to go back through Roger Caron's book and say, it actually was, most of it was true. He because some of it, I mean, as you get into the book, it's unbelievable. It's quite graphic. Some of it's really horrible to read. And so, yes, even when I first read about it, I'm like, oh, okay, I think this has been sort of exaggerated and embellished. And I can say today, unfortunately, it actually wasn't. So yeah.
Yeah.
But Billy Knight, no, unfortunately, he never got his manuscript published. So,
Well, if that ever does get released, let me know. I'd love to.
yeah,
That's a cool one. That's a great
yeah,
piece to have. Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. Um, just kind of a little bit. This is right at the end of chapter 1. This is just describing, I guess, the culture of Kingston and Kingston Prison, and then the area as well. Clinging to an archaic military system of strict order and discipline, seasoned guards reveled in punishing inmates for the smallest infraction. Shirts had to be buttoned and tucked at all times. Hands had to be removed from pant pockets when walking, and there was no talking past 8 p.m. The penitentiary rules stated that an inmate could speak with the officer in charge of him only in matters connected with his work. He had to approach the officer in a respectful manner, address him as sir, and stand at attention. Step out of line and you could lose hard-earned privileges, or worse, you went to the hole. There was little pride or feeling of accomplishment associated with being a prison guard. It was the occupation of last resort, the job you took if you couldn't get anything else. Poor public attitudes toward the many prisons in the Kingston area also contributed to a lack of respect for guards in the community. Guards did not wear uniforms out in public, and their families kept to themselves in the city. They worked a lot of overtime because of constant staffing shortages, but they knew where to get a cold beer when their shift was done. The Portsmouth Tavern, or the Ports, in the adjoining village was a place you went to drink if you worked at KP. That really stood out to me because what it not only shows is that there was a they it's almost like the guards themselves understood that there was shame at in what they were doing, and that was manifested outside of the prison walls. It was in the community. Like you couldn't, like the fact that they even say your families had to keep a low profile, like that's actually kind of serious. Like that's not trivial.
Yeah, and Kingston Penn is, I mean, it's it's a penitentiary city. There's there's over half a dozen um, facilities within the city limits of Kingston. So there was that was like one of the biggest employers in the area. And I was very surprised when I first heard that they would not wear their uniforms out in public, and they really kept to themselves. And the Portsmouth Tavern is still there, and it's one of whatever you want to imagine the Portsmouth Tavern being, it is. So it's quite a a place to be. So that, yeah, that surprised me. But again, they back in sort of the history of prison guards, like in the 1950s, many of those were ex-military. These were men that had come back from the war, and it was a very militaristic type environment. They actually wore their uniforms, actually looked like military uniforms. And then by 1971, that sort of older guard had left. But you had this new group in who did not have any formal training. A lot of them were individuals that maybe they tried to get on the police force, and if they didn't get on there, or maybe firefighting. So this was almost in some respects like the job of last resorts. It was a good job, obviously, good pay and pension and all those things, but it was a very, very difficult job. So the people that were in the prison versus some of the people who were guarding the prison, there was the 6 degrees of separation there. And then that changed dramatically, like in the 80s. The college opened up. In the 80s, they brought in female correctional officers, and they had to have higher education qualifications and degrees in social work and psychology. But in 1971, it was still very much kind of a working man's job.
And related to that, you do get into the details of that, but obviously there was some legislation that came in later on, and which had a huge impact on the day-to-day operations of prisons, and
Yeah.
establishing grievances and remedies for that. So that was later, but yeah, certainly it was kind of the overarching theme of Kingston at the time. Basically, it was the Wild West. Like it was just wild.
I love the expression that it's in. I wrote about in the book, the toughest 10 acres in Canada. Yes. So
the last section we're going to cover just, I guess, sort of leads into the events on when the riot actually kicks off. Mm-hmm. So there's just a bit of background information here. Kingston Penn was considered the toughest 10 acres in Canada, and in many respects, it was like a small walled-off inner city. It had its own government, police force, hospital, school, churches, and industries. Its citizens, for the most part, obeyed its rules and laws, but adherence to the inmate code was the only thing that counted, and an inmate's true standing was determined by his fellow prisoners, who would classify him as a wheel, a solid guy, a tough guy, or if they thought he was an informer, a rat. Basic tenets of the code were never trust or support a screw or the prison administration, never squeal on a fellow con, never steal from another inmate, and never enter another man's cell unless invited. The inmate code was really a guidebook on how to succeed in prison by not really trying to reform, wrote former inmate Roger Caron. In order to gain acceptance, one must follow the code to a fine degree. Basically, you were to mind your own business and do your time. Don't be a fly on the wall. Wise cons would advise, and instead be the wall. Violate the code, and your life became a living hell. At the prison heart of the city was the dome, and in the center of the dome was a hefty brass bell that had ruled over the prison population for decades. From the guards' point of view, the bell kept the inmates in line, but for the prisoners, it was an abomination, a hated symbol of repression. The bell controlled the inmates' every move. It rang to wake them up, to send them off to work, to announce every meal, and to send them to bed. By the end of each prison day, the bell had rung over 100 times. About the hated gong, Roger Caron wrote, "To the cons, it was an object of repugnance and outrage, an unjustifiable punishment, a brass monster that we were convinced had been designed solely to shatter our nerves with its loud and strident ringing. For the prison staff, it was the golden cow." And so we'll leave it off there. And I think it's reason I wanted to highlight that one to close it out is because I think it does a good job at describing the tension in through the use of symbolism as to how that bell was just so hated and what it represented. And it's interesting when people do, generally speaking, human behavior, there's a purpose to it. There's a reason people want to do something. And certainly when the riot kicks off and the shocking brutality and just the fact that it even happened at all was just pretty mind blowing, and kind of what sort of the kind of the inception and where it starts to fracture outwards. It seems to start there, and then obviously that's literally, I think that was page 23 or 26. So haven't even touched it, but it's just fantastic. And thank you very much for writing this book. And thank you so much for coming on here and speaking with me. We talked about a million topics, but I had a great time, and it's excellent experience for me just to pick your brain about this book. And I really enjoyed it. And I've said it 50 times. I'll say it again. Go get this book. It's fantastic. And before last thing too, you mentioned that you have a podcast. What's the title of that? What's it called?
Yeah, it's called Story Hunter Podcasts, and it's a true crime network, and basically going back into true crime, historical true crime. Every story is Canadian. It has a Canadian component. So it's been really terrific to go back in and look at some some older stories that were big stories at the time. I mean, I go back. There's one I know I did in the 40s. Actually two in the 40s, and then other decades and that. So it's really interesting, and I think bringing those stories to a podcast audience and to maybe a new demographic has been really exciting.
Fantastic. Well, thank you again for being here, and thank you so much for sharing your experiences and your work.
Thank you. It's been great.